All right. Hey, everyone. Rob Kepke here, and I have the pleasure of having on Steve Suissa, the owner of SHS Services. Hi, Steve. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Rob?
I'm doing well, man. I'm trying to make lemons, or was it make lemonade out of lemons, right?
Trying to stay
Uh,
sane.
Trying to stay sane. Yep. A lot of quality time with the cat, a lot of quality time with the wife right now. So it's been good though. Relatively speaking, right? Relatively speaking. So just a quick intro of Steve. Steve, like I said, is the owner of SHS Services. SHS Services is a payroll, bookkeeping, GovCon accounting company. It's headquartered in Rockville, Maryland, and you guys serve local businesses, right?
Correct.
Yeah, awesome. And the reason I wanted to have Steve on is we were on we're in a networking group together. And Steve was doing a great job of doing some Q&A with others in the group about what's going on. And Steve just mentioned right before we started recording that he's been watching about 3 seminars a day on this stuff for the last however many days, weeks, right? And what we want to do is just dive in and just start talking about the relief that's available for small businesses. There's a lot of information out there, and we just kind of want to cut through and provide clarity to everyone, right?
Okay.
Awesome. And so let's just dive in, right? Where I want to start is let's just start from the top. All right. What is the CARES Act? Everyone has been talking about it. We see it in the news all the time. But if you could just kind of give us kind of that intro to what it is, we can start there.
Sure. And thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to help anybody I can, with all this information. There's really a lot. You really said it properly. There's a lot to take in on all this. There's about an 800-page document that came out regarding the CARES Act, and I think that's just the first draft of what it's going to be eventually. So the CARES Act essentially is made up of a lot of different parts. So, excuse me, part of it is how do we treat employees that are either affected by the COVID-19, whether it's their pay, whether it's their child daycare, whether it's themselves medically or a family member. So there's guidelines that have come out regarding what happens if an employee, right, falls into one of those categories. And one of them specifically, right, is if your child's daycare, for example, is closed. So if your child's daycare is closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, essentially, and you keep that employee on, you now fall under the FMLA rules, which means you need to keep them employed, right? And you need to pay 80 hours worth of regular pay, and then an additional 10 weeks at 2/3 pay. So there are a whole bunch of rules regarding that. That's one side of the equation. The other side of that equation is that for paying them under this COVID-19 pay code, there's also tax advantages where you can take their gross pay, and there's a formula that's used to offset employer taxes, right, on your payroll. So they tried to balance out some of it with, the tax side, the employer tax side. And I can go into more detail about that if you want later. But the second half of this really is they're trying to also roll out the PPP program, which is the Payroll Protection Program. And they're also trying to roll out EIDL loans through the SBA. And both the PPP program and the EIDL program are SBA programs. There's just one is administered directly through the SBA, and the PPP program is actually administered through the banks. So that's the way that.
Okay, and so I guess if we're kind of distilling it down to, again, provide clarity for everyone, basically, if you're a small business or a sole proprietor, your 2 options now for economic relief are going to fall in this EIDL disaster loan or this paycheck protection program, the PPP, right?
That's at the SBA level. There are loans and grants that states have come out with, and that counties are actually starting to come out with as well. So again, being in Maryland actually had rolled out about 2 weeks ago a grant program and a loan program. Montgomery County is actually coming out next week. They passed this week, I believe it was $75 million worth of grants to be issued. And next week, there's going to be more clarity regarding how to apply, who qualifies, and what the time frame will be regarding getting those grants to Montgomery County located businesses. So I think there are multiple counties and states that have programs that they're putting in place. Everyone just needs to check into their own state.
Okay, got it. So I think for the purpose, I guess, of our Q&A here, our interview, we'll probably stick to more of the EIDL disaster loan and the paycheck protection program. But the recommendation from you is check your state, check your county. I don't know if off the top of your head if you have any resources or just what URL. I guess it's going to be different, right, from state
Every
to state,
URL
county
is
to county.
different. Yeah, every URL is different. If you just Google, or search online for any of these state websites and county websites, it's going to be plenty of information. Another recommendation would be, I know that the chambers, whether it's the Rockville Chamber of Commerce, the Bethesda Chamber of Commerce, or even for example, the Rockville Economic Development Corporation in Rockville, those are great resources, right? The MWBC is a great resource in Montgomery County and Rockville to help with these applications and information that's coming out.
Okay, awesome. And would the recommendation on your end be apply for everything, right? Is that kind of what you would tell somebody if you were advising them what to do right now?
Absolutely. I've told my clients, apply for everything and anything, because the beauty is if you get a loan from the SBA under the EIDL, and then you get a PPP grant, right, loan that can be forgiven. Essentially, you don't necessarily need to keep the EIDL loan. You can actually just pay that back. So I'd say go for everything that you can, and then see what comes in, because there's going to be a lot of applications here, and it is a first come, first served basis.
Got it. Okay. So let's back up for a second. So with the CARES Act, and I guess is it the provision in the act, the coronavirus stimulus package, or maybe that's what people are just calling it. But who is eligible? What makes you eligible for either the EIDL or the PPP? And if it's two separate eligibility requirements, we can separate that into two separate questions.
Sure. Well, let's take the EIDL first.
Okay.
That is actually a loan that you apply to the SBA for directly for an economic injury that you have sustained, that your company has sustained, right? So today, this pandemic qualifies as economic injury. And so that's a loan, though. So a business that's for-profit or nonprofit can actually apply to the SBA to get this loan. Okay, that's a loan that's to be paid back over 30 years. Okay, the PPP program is actually a loan, but it's a loan that will be forgiven if you use the funds for what is required to be used for. So the funds are to be used for payroll, for rent, for utilities. And if you use at least 75% of it for payroll, right, then they are going to be forgiving that loan.
Okay, got it. And so from my understanding with the EIDL, so there was a whole thing about when they first rolled it out, you were applying to like an old platform or even like, I think it was a PDF application, and then the platform went down and they rolled out a new platform, and then that went down and they finally rolled out a new one. And in that, for the EIDL, they were stipulating or they were mentioning something about a 10K grant. I guess, could you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so you're correct, is that the original application on the website, pretty much there were, I believe over 60,000 people that applied that ended up crashing the website. So the folks at the SBA that are really phenomenal folks, they retooled the website and they made it easier and capable to handle the influx of all these applicants that are coming in around the U.S. There is a provision that says in there that, for applying and being approved, right? So, and I don't mean approve that you're approved for the loan, but that they've accepted your application, you actually will get a $10,000 advance. And the literature has come out that says that that $10,000 is essentially a grant. Okay, it's not to be repaid back. So you can actually keep that 10 grand and use it for your business, whether or not you get approved for the EIDL loan. So that's why we're suggesting that everybody apply.
Does that 10K, is that going to fall under, so I guess the requirements for how you spend that for the EIDL disaster loan is different than the PPP?
Correct. There is a specification for how you're supposed to use EIDL funds when they're dispersed. However, there's been no guidance on the $10,000. And so the guidance on the EIDL loans, of course, is to use those funds to sustain payroll and to continue the business operations. It's not to be used for bonusing the owner, right, or giving the owner one big fat paycheck and terminating everybody.
Right.
So, I don't know what provisions they're going to put in place to tighten those rules up or to examine what funds they're used for. But essentially, that 10 grand is a grant.
Okay, got it. So, and I think that in itself just underscores why you should be applying to everything in general, right? You get 10K of money that doesn't have any tight stipulations around it, any tight requirements. Just park it, right? Sit on it. If you need it, use it. If you don't, you have 10K maybe when everything's over to invest elsewhere, right?
Yep. Or you could say use the 10 grand for payroll and not use the other 10 grand that you have from revenue.
That is true. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more specifics about the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program loan. So we already talked about who is eligible. What is needed in order to determine your eligibility?
So there are requirements for applying for and submitting documents with the PPP program. It is a fluid program at this point. There are changes being made almost on a daily basis as to what's needed. But the summary of this program is really, it's a phenomenal program. It looks at your last year's worth of payroll, and it will give you 2.5 times your monthly average. So to make it easy, let's say that your entire payroll last year was $120,000, right? That would be an average of $10,000 a month of payroll that you have based on your payroll reports. And that has to be supported by your payroll reports. You cannot add employees now and claim that you're going to be paying them this amount of money. You cannot double your workforce, right, and pay those folks, that are coming in on these funds, right? So what it says is it's 2.5 times that monthly amount. So if $10,000 is your average monthly payroll, the PPP program allows you to apply for and get basically $25,000. And that's to be used for the payroll, rent, utilities, and interest on debt in order to help the business continue and sustain itself during the next 10 weeks. And there are stipulations. You do have to use these funds over the next 10 weeks. So you can't stretch these funds out and use them over the course of a year. The purpose of it is to really keep folks employed in your business for the next 10 weeks to get through this pandemic.
And so let's talk about who you have to use the money in a certain way on your employees, keep the business running. Do contractors fall, 1099s, do they fall into that category of people or resources you can spend this money on?
It's a great question. There has not been a tremendous amount of clarity on this issue, and what the terminology that's used in the PPP guidelines says payroll, and so the interpretation is that I am understanding from several bankers is, if you have folks that are 1099 that are on your payroll, right, then that can qualify as part of the PPP program. However, if you think about paying all of your subcontractors across the board, right? I mean, you pay your accountant, that's 1099. You pay your lawyer, that's 1099. You pay your rent, that's 1099. You pay a bunch of subcontractors, the cleaning folks in your office, right, are 1099. So in theory, if you included all 1099s in this, you're essentially covering much more than just your payroll. You're covering a lot of other costs that the payroll protection program in its use is really not intended to cover. So I do know, and I have had discussions where folks are trying to get all of their 1099s covered. You know, my personal opinion of that is that it's going to get your application kicked back out by the SBA. So my advice to folks is go based on what you can prove. If your payroll report for the last 12 months shows 2 subcontractors on it and 10 employees, then I say that's something you can support that has gone through payroll. And that's what you should use.
Got it. So along with that, so with your advice, it kind of does, in theory, leave all of those 1099s potentially out to dry. Is there a solution for these contractors, these individuals, these sole proprietors who have been, getting steady income from their clients, from their customers? How are they able to find, economic relief right now?
So the purpose of the PPP program is really paycheck protection, right? Which is really W-2, right? Or an employee. A subcontractor technically is their own company, right? They are a subcontractor. They own their own company. You're paying a vendor. So that vendor, in theory, that company has multiple clients, right? So they should be eligible as well to apply under the PPP program themselves because they're getting money in from their clients. They're in turn then paying themselves. Now, currently, right now, the PPP program is only accepting, right, LLCs. It is not accepting sole proprietorships. I believe that is going to be rolled out around the 10th of this month. So about another week. And then sole proprietors, 1099s, contractors will be allowed to apply for the PPP program.
Okay, got it. And so with an LLC, and I think there might be confusion around payroll in the traditional sense of, some people just cut themselves a check. Some people just transfer money over, right? A lot of businesses don't necessarily use a payroll provider to process, right? So if you are one of these companies, one of these businesses, maybe you're an LLC and you have just been taking owner's draws for yourself, right? Just cutting yourself a check, transferring money over. What would you need to, I guess, prove payroll, to qualify or to be eligible?
So the way that I've read the statute currently is that you would not be eligible. You would need to wait until the 10th when the individual sole proprietor and contractor PPP program is rolled out and then apply under that. If you think about the reason for that as an owner taking a draw, your draw can be whatever you want it to be. So what is to say that if you were making $50,000 last year under a draw, that you apply to the PPP program and you say, it should be $100,000, they grant you $100,000 and now you're paying yourself $100,000. So there's going to be rules around, and this is why there's a delay until the 10th on the individuals and the contractors, is because they're trying to set the rules on how do we figure out and how do we confirm, right, that what they're asking for is actually legit.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so circling back to the paycheck protection, kind of the different bullet points, or I guess frequently asked questions. What's the terms of this loan? What's the interest rate? How long is the loan for? And again, what are you? You might have said it. You believe you said it earlier, but what are you required to pay back?
For the PPP program,
Yes.
The beauty of this program, it's absolutely amazing. In a lot of ways, I give our legislators credit for this program, the SBA for this program. It's phenomenal. If you're able to qualify and you get the funds, which are the 2.5 times your monthly payroll, and you use the funds for payroll, rent, utilities, and interest on debt, this amount, this 2.5 times, is forgiven. It's a grant. It becomes a grant. The loan is forgiven, and it's not included in your taxable income. So there's a huge advantage to this PPP program. Again, the sole purpose of it and why it's 2.5 months is really to sustain a business through the next 10 weeks of the shutdown, assuming that the shutdown will end in a maximum of 10 weeks.
Yeah. And I want to circle back to that point. So if I don't bring it back up, I want you to remind me about 10 weeks and how long this is going to, we'll need economic relief. But let's circle back to it. So PPP, what are the required documents that you're going to need to apply? If you could get specific on that.
Sure, and the documents have actually shifted quite a bit. So because this is being administered by the banks are basically being asked to certify that what's being submitted to the SBA is accurate. So the documents that we've seen so far that are required are proof of your EIN number, your payroll register, which shows 2019 gross wages and the state taxes, which is part of the PPP program, your 941s, which are your quarterly 941s, those are tax returns for payroll, which show and prove that the payroll register is actually accurate. There's also, in some cases, a letter, a certificate of good standing with the state that shows that you are actually in good standing and not in default. One of the questions as well on the PPP program application is whether or not you are delinquent on taxes. And so they're looking at that as well. Again, there's been no guidance as to whether they're still going to approve your application or deny it based on this. There's been no guideline. But they are asking the question. There's also the other part of it is a copy of your driver's license and your tax returns. So far, those are the documents that are needed to be given to the bank that allows the bank to verify that what you're giving them is accurate, as well as, I believe I forgot to mention, financial statements. So your 2019 and your first 3 months of 2020 financial statements. All of this is used by the banks to verify that what you're submitting is correct, and then they're going to be able to basically log into the SBA website under their SBA authorization and then submit these documents or whatever documents are needed.
Got it. Okay. Okay, so circling back to the point I wanted to talk about. So this economic relief lasts for 10 weeks. In your opinion, and I know we're getting more subjective now than objective, but in your opinion, are businesses going to require more relief? And would that relief come? Would we actually get that relief, right? And I guess the question, the view I'm taking is even if things start getting better, 10 weeks, everyone's back, able to go to work, the economy might not bounce back as quickly, most likely won't, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, that's the $2.2 trillion question, huh? I think that from what we've seen, being, of course, in the accounting and in the finance world and the payroll world, we've spoken with all of our clients, almost all of our clients regarding this, and they're hopeful that they're going to be able to get back to resuming business and be able to hire their employees when they're released from mandatory stay-at-home rules. And so hopefully this will be released. And I believe that business won't be back to normal, but at least business will start to move. And it will hurt the owners, but you're hoping that, we're hoping that anything that they have as AR, right, as receivables, can carry them through not only this period, but also for a while after everybody gets back to work. There's also, my guess is that this is the reason why Maryland, Montgomery County, and other states and counties are coming out with additional aid as well. One of the provisions in the Montgomery County grants that have been approved is there's actually a set aside, about 25% is set aside for restaurants, recognizing that Montgomery County has been hit pretty hard by the restaurant closure. And so hopefully these grants, these additional grants, and these tax savings, keeping your employees employed during this time, paying them, and if you're using the FFCRA pay codes, right, the coronavirus pay code, so to speak, I guess that's the incorrect term for it, but the slang term, that allows you to have some tax advantages. So there are some things hopefully that will help. If there's a shutdown through the end of the summer, my guess is there's going to have to be another stimulus plan. And somebody, I was talking to an accountant earlier this week as well, and we were saying that, $2.2 trillion is a massive amount of money, right, to roll out. But if you think about as a percentage of how much debt we already have, it's really not much at all. So should a stimulus package be needed again and in an election year, I'm pretty sure that they'll try to help more people. You may not qualify the second time; it may be other people that get it, but at least they're going to try to help. So,
yeah, and I forgot my question.
I was going to say, one of the beauties about being American is that we can't sit still, right? So we can only tolerate disruption of our normal lives for so long. So sooner or later, we're going to get back to normal, or whatever normal is. But we're going to be out and about and working. We need to work. We need to be around other people. We need to generate something positive on a daily basis. And I feel that will is much stronger than the ability to remain locked down.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on that. I remember my question real quick, which is, and this is getting a little bit off topic, but I think it's probably a question everyone has on their mind is, just how is the stimulus being paid for? If there's another one, how is that being paid for? How is this? What are potential? And we don't have to go down this path if you don't want to, but I'm just curious. What are potential repercussions of us getting these really $1 trillion stimulus packages?
And that's actually been asked of me already multiple times, and it's an interesting question. From a math perspective, being an accountant, I look at a lot of things via math perspective. The unemployment office, for example, the Maryland unemployment office has come out and said that you won't be hurt if your employees file for unemployment, even though there's this additional amount of money that they're being provided through the end of the year as part of their unemployment package. You have to realize that at some point somebody's got to pay for all this. There may not be a tax increase now, but in the past, right, we have had tax increases. We have had assessments, whether it be property tax or the unemployment rate went up, in the past for each person, or they assessed what they called an administrative assessment. And so my feeling as a tax guy, right, my opinion as a tax guy is that there is going to be an increase. Somehow, some way, this has to be paid for down the road.
Right. Yeah. And how, and again, I'm kind of veered off topic here. What kind of similarities and differences are you seeing between the stimulus package now versus the recession in 2008?
This is honestly like nothing I've ever seen. Unfortunately, I was old enough to experience 2008 and to experience 1991, and a couple of those. It's truly unlike anything we've ever seen. I mean, this has been such a massive shutdown, whereas in the past, something has caused the economy to take a punch to the gut, and there's been layoffs and unemployment. nothing has been to the point where businesses in mass have actually had to shut down the way they have in this way. In fact, if you look around, what is really still working, are grocery stores, right? It's food. It boils down to food. Um, Even gas stations activity has decreased because not as many people are driving. So it's really completely different than 2008.
Yeah, and comparing kind of even just the stimulus package itself and like the structure of it and the relief, is that completely different also, or are there similarities to what we had seen then? I guess the idea here being, is there a reference point that we could look to potentially say this is how things will go, moving forward, or are we kind of just like, we're gonna have to figure this out as we go?
It's an interesting question. 2008, the bailout really was not to the American people. The bailout was really to big business and to banks, right? So this is a stimulus package that is really designed to help everybody but big business. This is really designed to help, you, me, business owners that, are employing folks. I mean, small businesses are 85% of the economy. I mean, they're 85% of the businesses that are out there. And so if you think about how many people they employ, I mean, that's a huge number of people to be laid off. If a large company has issues or financial issues, one big bailout, one tax, credit can resolve that. Without a stimulus package like this, you're affecting 85% of businesses out there without a stimulus package to help employees and business owners. So I think it's quite different than 2008.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, and 85%, is that number right? 85% of registered businesses are small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. All right, so I want to go from there and circle back into the actual topic that we hopped on here to talk about. And I sourced a few questions from my audience, from some questions I think you've seen. I did not edit any of these questions down, so I'm just going to kind of go through them, and if they don't make sense or they're weird or have slight like tinges of illegalness to them, we can address it, or or just move past it. Um, and let's see. All right, so here's the first one. I planned on finally giving myself a paycheck when a contract came in mid March. Now we're not sure when it'll come in. Is it okay to pay myself with the PPP and then take myself off of if the contract doesn't come in?
Okay. Well, that's actually a more complicated question than it sounds, because you cannot, if you own a business, you cannot decide to pay yourself on a paycheck or not pay yourself on a paycheck. So if you are an LLC that's an S corp, right, you're required to pay yourself as an employee, a W-2. Okay. If you are not an S corp, right, you cannot issue yourself a paycheck. You can only take draws. So the question really is more of, how is the company structured, and are you allowed to take paychecks? So if you put that aside for a second, the structure of the company, whether you're an S corp or not, if you've been paying yourself and you held off because of profit, right, and then you get the PPP program loan approved or the grant approved, then yes, the owners are allowed to pay themselves, right, up to $100,000, essentially annualized $100,000. So, but that's a deeper tax question, because if you're not an LLC with an S corp, if you're just an LLC, you cannot issue yourself a W-2.
And so I guess there's some confusion in there for me as well. So let's say you're an LLC and you have employees on W-2, so payroll, but you've been taking owner's draw. So, and we were talking earlier about how if you've been taking owner's draw and you're not on payroll, but in the context of just a sole proprietor, individual, 1099, that you wouldn't be eligible. How would that work now again, that you have LLC taking owner's draws, so you're not on payroll, but you do have payroll with your employees?
That's again a great question. It's the Paycheck Protection Program really covers payroll. And so if you're taking draws, right, you are not on payroll. So I have heard different bankers suggest to put it in as part of the application. And what's the worst case that could happen is that when they review it in 10 weeks from now or 2 months from now, right, and they decide that your draw was not acceptable because it wasn't part of the payroll program, essentially that just converts into a loan.
Got it. And I think it's something we did we touch on this earlier? So when it converts to a loan, what is the interest rate and what's the length of the loan? I forget if we mentioned that earlier.
So the PPP program, I believe that is at 1% loan.
Okay. 1% interest.
1% interest, and I believe the term is 30 years. But I have to double check that. I apologize for that, but let me double check that. We can post that in the comments.
Yeah. And I believe with the EIDL, that was 3.5% to 4.5% for 2 years. Is that right?
No, that was the EIDL was 30 years.
That was 30 years. Okay.
The EIDL was 30 years. But the Paycheck Protection Program, I can't remember if it's 3 years or if it's 30 years. I can't remember which one that is.
But the EIDL one had the higher interest rate, 3.5 to 4.5, compared to,
correct.
I think I saw either a half or 1%, like you were saying, for the paycheck protection.
Right. And again, this is what the regulations are now. That's not to say that either one won't change.
Okay. Got it. And I think that underscores the importance of continuing to read up on this stuff. And, maybe a week from now, you and I do another one of these just because things might be completely different, right?
It could be.
It's the, I guess, the flip side of it being such a fluid, flexible program is that nothing's set in stone, right?
Correct.
All right. So next question. If you have had an employee that is not on the normal payroll, but has been getting cash for working, I remember this one, can that employee collect unemployment? Assume they can use an employer of 10 years ago as a basis. My interpretation of this question, besides the fact that somebody's getting paid under the table, is they're looking out to see if an employee of theirs is able to collect unemployment. Basically, they're looking out for their employee, even though they've been kind of setting it up in a weird position by not paying them legally.
So I'm going to take a stab in the dark here, and that's tongue in cheek, being if you've been paying somebody cash under the table, you have not been paying your share of the employer taxes that you should be paying. And most likely, this person is also not reporting their income, which means that the state and the IRS are not getting the taxes that they should be getting for that income. So the concept of going to file for unemployment for somebody who has technically been paid cash under the table will not be allowed and will not be looked favorably upon.
Got it. So I guess, maybe leave it at that. It will not be looked favorably upon to do that.
Yes.
All right, next question. Will the employer's unemployment rate go up should the staff use the enhanced policy?
Well, it kind of relates back to...
I guess I was when he says enhanced policy. I guess are they assuming collect unemployment? Is that what they mean?
Yes. So to get back to your earlier question, right now, what has come out is that the states have said they will not penalize a company by increasing their unemployment rate if employees are laid off due to basically this loss of business and downturn in the economy, right? But to follow up with that, it's what you and I talked about earlier, is that if you don't change the rate, how's all this going to get paid for? Because it is an additional $600 a week on top of your regular pay. So one of the funny things is that somebody who's making minimum wage would actually make more on unemployment than they would if they stayed at their job for 40 hours a week.
Wow. So let's talk about that for a second. So I'm intuiting here because I don't know much about how unemployment works. Is you would file for unemployment and then list your past employer on the application, and then that has some sort of ramifications for the current employer. I guess if you could talk a little bit more how unemployment works, would it add some clarity here?
Sure. So in summary, what happens is that every time that you run a payroll, there is a percentage of payroll that is added on to that payroll, to the taxes you pay, that goes to Maryland unemployment. That sits in a fund for Maryland to use to pay employees or folks that are unemployed. Okay, your rate changes based on your experience. So if you have 5 years of no terminations, you're going to have a pretty low unemployment rate, meaning that you're contributing a low amount to this fund with every payroll. If you have high turnover, most likely you have a high unemployment rate, which means that you're paying pretty much into this fund at a high rate. The rate can range anywhere from 0.3% to about 14%, depending on your industry. Yep. So with every payroll you run, there's an employer tax that is calculated, collected, and remitted to the state. So when an employee goes and files for unemployment, they're going to basically say, here's the list of employers that I have been with for the last 10 years or 5 years or 3 employers, whatever it's going to be. And that experience or what they pay out is going to go against the fund and paid out by the Maryland fund. However, if you have 1, 2, 5 people that are terminated, they will reassess every December. They reassess that rate, and your rate changes in January. They've said that they're not going to change this rate by anybody who's affected this year. I just personally don't see how that means this year. That doesn't mean they won't change it next year.
Right, and that goes back to what we were saying about how does this get paid for, and it seems, I guess, to you that seems like the most likely option of getting some money to be paid back here.
Exactly. I think when people run payrolls, they need to understand that in general, there's an employee gross wage, right? What you're paying your employee, and then there is an employer tax, right? That the employer pays on top of that. So if your payroll is, let's just say, $10,000 a week, right? The additional tax you pay is approximately about $1,000. So your total payroll is $11,000. So 10 grand goes to the employees, 1 grand is the employer additional tax you pay to the state and to the IRS for Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, and I think that clears it up, and it segues nicely into my next question, or the next question we have, which is it better to allow the staff to go on unemployment or keep them on so the SBA loan can be forgiven?
So that's a loaded question. So everybody's situation is different, and every employer, right, has to look at their individual business and decide what they need to do. So to give you an example, let's take both examples, right? I have a particular client who called who said, I'm going to apply for the PPP program, but in the meantime, I can't keep my employees employed until I wait to find out whether I'm approved or not and these funds are dispersed. So the recommendation was, well, terminate the employees so that they can go and get unemployment, right, for the period of time that it takes for you to get this loan grant if you use it for payroll. And then once you get this grant or this loan, right, you can rehire your employees, right, and pay them over this 10-week period, right, whether it's for work, right, or under the COVID-19 pay codes, right, the FFCRA pay codes. So whichever one you want to do. Now, in some cases, as I mentioned before, some folks are going to make more on unemployment than they will coming back to work.
Right.
And so you're not going to be penalized if they choose not to come back to work, right? But again, every business is different. For individuals that are more highly paid, right? This PPP program, will allow you to keep them employed for 10 weeks. And that may be enough time, which is 2.5 months. That may be enough time for the economy at least to start back up, where you start to generate some revenue. It may not be 100% of the revenue you were making before, but at least gives you that bridge to retain those employees and bring them back.
Got it. And so you keep mentioning the 10 weeks here. So when does the 10 weeks start? Is it retroactive? Is it as soon as you get the money? A little bit of clarity on that.
So there is no clarity on the guidelines. In theory, this was all effective April 1st. Okay. But and the PPP program documentation says that you will be approved or denied within 3 days, right? But even as of today, which the SBA website was supposed to be open for this PPP applications to be submitted by the banks, is actually not open yet. It's on hold. It's on pause. So whether it opens up on Monday, whether it opens up Tuesday, or some of the time in the future, I guess that's going to determine also how quickly they can process these applications. If the original SBA EIDL loans had 60,000 applications within a matter of a week, I can't even imagine what the PPP program number of applications is going to be.
Yeah. And so I guess where we're at right now, like you were saying, is so people have submitted to the banks. The next step in this process is for the banks to submit to the SBA.
Correct.
And that's kind of where they're on hold right now.
Correct.
So I think one of the questions I've been hearing and getting, which I think this answers it, not great, but is when will we get the money? And it's basically TBD is the answer.
You'll get it when the website opens up and they can process your application. And that's pretty much the way that it's going to work.
Yeah, and I guess there's really no good information on, once they process, how long it's going to be, until you get it. I've heard a few days to weeks before people would get any money. Yeah.
Which is why that other question, the previous question, is a hard one to answer, is whether you should furlough, whether you should allow folks to get unemployment, or whether you should keep paying them. It's a hard question to answer because every business is different. And, some folks can sustain going 30 days and paying their folks. And some business owners can't sustain that at all.
So can the PPP money loan be applied retroactively? For example, if I'm a business and I have enough runway, I have cash flow, or I have savings, let's say, and I'm like, okay, cool, I can pay my guys for the next month and a half, or 2 months until I get this loan, and then can I then pay myself back the money that I paid out to keep these guys on board?
So it's unclear right now what the starting period will be. I think it's also going to be based upon when the loan is approved and when the money is given, right? So if they're able to approve all of these fairly quickly in the matter of a week, then I think there will be some ability to retroactively pay people from April 1st. But if some of these applications are reviewed and approved at the end of April, even into May, I don't know how you can make this retroactive.
So off of that, let's assume that that's correct. It almost to me seems like it would be more prudent to terminate employees so that they can get on unemployment, and then you can rehire them back, or else you might get stuck paying them out and then not be able to recoup that money, which, depending on the business, if you're trying to do the right thing for your employees, but you don't necessarily have the runway, that could hurt.
Well, if you close your business because you're either ordered to, right, or you don't have the funds to keep it open, or there's just no work because you've been ordered to close, in theory, you literally have folks that are sitting at home with no pay. And so they're going to go for unemployment. right? So you can't close your business and not terminate people because they're going to need income. So if you don't pay your employees, most likely they're going to just go for unemployment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's tough, man. That's a tough situation to be in for sure.
It
Um,
is. It's a horrible situation.
yeah. All right. Next question is, what is the telecommuting grant? Have you heard of that?
I have not.
All
I
right.
apologize,
I was,
but I have not.
yeah. Uh,
Is
unfortunately, I
that
was
if
going to.
that if that relates to the Maryland grant, that actually is a grant that is being given by the state of Maryland for you to convert your employees from on-site employees to allow them to telework. So it's an IT grant. It allows you to basically
Interesting.
buy laptops or whatever desktops for their home so that they can actually remote in and do work. But that means that you need to be able to continue doing work as well, right? So if you're shut down and have no business, right, then getting an IT grant or telecommuting grant really doesn't work because your employees have no work from home. But if you're folks like a bookkeeping firm, let's use bookkeeping as an example, right? If you're a bookkeeping firm like we are, and you have and can have folks work from home remote, right, then that grant will allow you to buy computers, monitors, VPNs, switches, whatever you need in order for your employees to be able to work remote.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that definitely sounds like what that question was intended to cover. So I'm glad you were able
Could
to
be,
recover on that.
it could be that my head was in the PPP program, and that one threw me for a loop there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure there's gonna like a ton of different, state and county programs as well coming out like that. All right, so that's the last question on my list. What I wanted to do before we wrapped up is just ask you some questions. Like you've been talking to businesses a lot of late, and personally, I'm curious as to are these businesses that you're talking to? I guess one question is are they? Have you seen businesses who are pivoting into other activities to try to make the most of this situation?
So we have in some cases. For example, restaurants. We have restaurant clients, and a lot of them have shifted to really just providing takeout and delivery, where they'll keep an employee on staff and they will just do deliveries for lunch, for dinner. There's also been some other shifts in other business. Like we have one of our clients who was doing dog walking, and she has shifted her business to actually do grocery shopping for folks who don't want to leave their home.
Yeah.
So there are some shifts out there that people are quite clever and in changing the way that they do work.
Yeah, and for me, like that excites me to just see people being resilient. People, uh, I think we had talked about this before we hopped on. Is everything is crazy right now. This our discussion here, I think, is really important to help people get their footing financially to make sure they're going to be okay. The priorities here are health, your family, make sure everyone is good. Financially, make sure everyone is sound and they know they're going to be able to cover their basic essentials. But as a business owner, the next step in my mind is how do you make better of the situation that you have right now, and that and the prospect of that gets me really excited. And I'm glad we were able to take the time to address this because this needs to be done before people can feel comfortable moving on to that next step of how do you thrive and get through this.
Definitely.
So, Steve, really appreciate you taking this time to talk to me. Um, where can people find you if they want? I'm obviously going to tag on LinkedIn. Are you anywhere else online that people can reach out, or should is kind of LinkedIn DM where you should go? I guess where can people find Steve?
Well, thank you, and thank you for the time. It really, it's an honor to be able to share all of this. It's so much information that anybody that we can help get through this, I mean, it's really a blessing for us to be able to help people. And so,
And actually, before you go on with that, let me just before we wrap up, did we miss anything? Is there anything we didn't cover? There is a lot of information. You saying that kind of just, I had a list of questions that we went through, but you're the expert on this. Is there any other questions that you're getting that we missed?
So there is. I mean, there is so much information, and it's changing. It's fluid. It's changing every day. And so the best thing to do really is to be in touch with, right, us, or be in touch with your payroll provider. One of the advantages, and we were talking about this earlier, one of the advantages of working with local businesses, it's not just supporting local businesses, but my clients literally have called the office or called me on my cell and have been able to speak about the PPP program and the EIDL program, and I've been able to give them, feedback and information to help them through it. Whereas a lot of, I think, the larger companies, right, don't have the staff or the knowledge to be able to disseminate this information and help clients individually. So I think that, tagging me on LinkedIn, which is a great platform. I love LinkedIn. Going to our website, reaching out to us, calling our office. I'm happy to talk to, folks that need help. I mean, obviously our clients have been calling, and we've been helping them through all of this.
Awesome. And so, again, it's Steve Suissa, SHS Services. That's shsservices.com. You go there, you can fill out a contact form if you want to reach them, or the phone number is up on there, and you can give him a call. Again, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time. This was a ton of information, great information, clarified a lot for me, and hopefully clarifies a lot for everyone else who'd be watching.
Well, and thank you for doing this and for putting this together. It's really very, very nice of you to do.
Awesome. All right. Until next time, everyone.